Hi Apes, this is chapter 5. Please read page 119 to talk about um, interesting species and why we don't want to lose everything that we have on the earth because we might be losing some species that would really help us a lot. So read page 119. Okay, so this chapter is going to be a lot of things that you learned in biology class, so we're going to review all those things. There's three things that are going to determine how rich a biome or area on the earth is. It's how many different ecosystems you have in that area, how many species you have in that area, different types of species, and within that species, each species, what is the genetic diversity? So how many different genotypes do you have in that particular area? So this is a picture of it. So this would have how much ecosystem diversity do we have, how many different species live in that particular place, and how many different genotypes are within that species. So species richness is the number of species in a given area. Species evenness is the measure of whether a particular ecosystem is dominated by one species or if the number of each species is about the same. So a really good ecosystem has good evenness. So if you had 5 grass plants of a particular species and you had 5 of a different kind of grass species, if they're pretty much even, the distribution is about the same, say 5 of one species, 5 of another, 5 of another, then that would be a very even area, and then that's good because you don't want something dominated by one species. So evolution is the mechanism underlying biodiversity. So evolution is a change in the genetic composition of a particular population over time. Microevolution is evolution below a species. So, for example, if you go to the grocery store, you see 5 different kinds of apples. That's microevolution. Man has interbred apples to get a particular characteristic for that apple, but they're still all apples. And 2 apple trees together, if you traded the pollen between those two, you would still get apples. So that's they're still the same species. That's called an apple. Macroevolution happens when you make a new species, or even higher up, family, class, or phyla. That's macroevolution. So micro is just particular one thing, like you're breeding dogs to get a particular characteristic. It's still a dog though, and 2 dogs can mate and make puppies. So that's microevolution. So let's talk about the basics that you learned in biology. Genes are a particular place on the DNA that codes for a particular protein. Okay, genotypes are the complete set of genes in an individual. So if we took your DNA out of your cell and we put it on the DNA analyzer and we figured out all the genes that you have, that would be your genotype. And everybody has a different genotype. Mutation is a random change in the genetic code. It's going to happen by humans deciding to breed different dogs for different characteristics, and it can be just random, by random chance. Okay. Phenotype is the actual set of characteristics that we see. So if we see St. Bernard, then we'd have to see a big dog with shaggy hair. That's the phenotype based on the genotype of St. Bernard, that particular St. Bernard. Evolution by artificial and natural selection. So by artificial selection is when humans decide to make a breed. So humans have done that with all kinds of farm animals, with dogs. So we have particular dogs like Irish setters and beagles and things like that, and that's because humans have decided, hey, we like this characteristic and we want that, so we're going to breed the animals to get that. Evolution by natural selection happens in nature, and it determines which which particular individuals of the species are more likely to survive and reproduce. So natural mutations happen, and then if that particular individual survives and reproduces, then we have a change in that species. So that's evolution by natural selection. We can either have human done by humans, which is artificial selection, or we can do naturally, which is natural mutations, and that's the environment does it itself. Let me see what I want to say about this one. So this is a phylogenetic tree, and phylogenies are based on similarities of traits among species. And so you can use a phylogenetic tree to figure out a particular species based on the parts that the animal has. So these dogs have different characteristics, so they're broken down into different types of dogs. So Darwin came up with theory of evolution by natural selection, and this is the major parts of his theory. Let me find the page for this. This is on page 126 and 127. Excuse me, page 127. This is what his theory states. Individuals produce an excess of offspring. Not all offspring can survive. Individuals differ in their traits, and these differences in traits can be passed from parents to offspring. These differences in traits allow some individuals to survive and reproduce. So this slide is showing natural selection. All species produce an excess number of offspring. Only those offspring having the best genotype are going to pass those on to the next generation and get to the type of offspring that are going to live in that particular area. So evolution by random process says that you have mutations in the DNA that occur randomly, and these add to the genetic variation of the population. These are different situations that have to do with evolution by random processes. So you can have, and you learn this in biology, so let's review it a little bit. A genetic drift says that if you have a large population, the composition, the genetic composition tends to remain the same over time. But in a small population, you can have a lot of change over time. So genetic drift, it depends on the population size. Bottleneck effect says that you can have, if a population experiences a drastic decrease in size, it goes through a bottleneck. That's why it's called that. Some genotypes will be lost, and the genetic composition of the survivors will differ from the original group because you took a random small sample, and so it messes with the population you have afterwards. The founder effect says that if you have a few individuals from a mainland population, so for example, say we had a bunch of little mice from California, and for some reason they got on a ship and went onto a little tiny small island, and we just had a subset of those species from California, and they went to the island. The genetic composition of the new guys on the new island is going to be a lot different than the mainland. So that's called the founder effect. So here's pictures of all this. So mutations can happen, and then over time and multiple generations, you're going to have more of that mutation showing up. That's mutation in general. Genetic drift says that you have, in large populations, you're going to pretty much keep the percentages of the mutation, but in small groups, it's going to change up. So here you have 2, going down to 1 and going to 0 over time. That's the genetic drift theory. Bottleneck says that you've got a huge population, something happens where you kill off a whole bunch of people and you just have a little bit left. Their composition is going to be a lot different than this composition, and then over time you're going to have a whole new composition. So this really changed it up based on that bottleneck where you lost a lot of people, lost a lot of species, a lot of animals in that particular species. Founder effect says, hey, you have a mainland, some guys decide to go to another isolated area, and the genetic diversity changes from the original. So make sure you know those different evolutionary changes. So let's talk about allopatric versus sympatric speciation, if I could talk. So we have microevolution happening around us all the time. One common way in which evolution creates new species is through geographic isolation. If we have two separate habitats and they differ in environmental conditions, such as temperature and precipitation, natural selection is going to favor different phenotypes in each of the habitats. If the individuals can't move between the populations, then the two geographically isolated populations will continue to become more and more genetically distinct. The two populations are going to be separated not only by geographic isolation but also reproductive isolation. The process of speciation requires geographic isolation, and this is called allopatric speciation. So I think it'll be better if I show you a picture. Let me see if I have a picture here. So this happens, the speciation happens when you make new species based on geographic or reproductive isolation. So if you take, I think I have a picture, let me look. No, I don't. But in the book on page 131 they show it. They have a field mouse population in this big giant area, and then a river decides to run through that area, and because the two groups are isolated, they interbreed, and they become two different entirely new species. So that's geographic isolation. And look on page 131 to see what that looks like. That picture is a good picture. Sympatric speciation, the evolution of new species into two new species. If you don't have geographic isolation, this is due to having an increased number of sets of chromosomes inside the particular animal or plant. Okay, so this has to do with genetic changes. So let's look at the pace of evolution. So a species can adapt over time if there's a lot of time for it to adapt, if the environmental changes happen over a long time. If the population of the particular animal or plant has a high genetic variation, then it can change and adapt to the new situation. If the population is small, then it can shift and go into and be able to deal with the change. And if the generation time is short, which means if the animal doesn't take a long time to change to reproduce. So like mice have a really short generation time. Humans have a really long one, so it would take us a long time to change. But mice, plants, things like that, they can change pretty fast. Bacteria can change super fast. So these things show different conditions and what would happen to evolution. So look at those four, make sure you understand those four. They're on page 133 in your book. So some species can, all species have an optimal environment, and some have a wide range of tolerance, and some have a really limited range of tolerances. A fundamental niche is the ideal conditions for a species, and every species has a fundamental niche. They might be able to survive in a particular area, but if it's not the right conditions, the temperature, precipitation, plant life, if they're a consumer, then they might be able to survive, but they won't be able to reproduce. So there's a particular set of conditions that are going to make an animal able to both survive, grow, and reproduce, and that's its fundamental niche. So, for example, these guys right here in this temperature set of temperatures is going to be able to do everything: survive, grow, and reproduce. But if the condition, the temperature changes up a little bit, it's either going to be able to survive and grow, or just be able to survive, and then after that it's going to be killed off on these edges right here. Okay, so every species has its own particular set of conditions that it likes. So there's different ideas of when we want to talk about niches. So a realized niche is the range of abiotic and biotic conditions under which the species lives. So those particular parameters, like temperature, rainfall, is going to tell where a species wants to live on the face of the earth. Niche generalists can survive under a wide range, so they might have a really broad temperature distribution. Those are niche generalists. They can live on really hot or really low temperature. So like humans can survive because we figured out how to do that in all different conditions. Niche specialists can only live in specific habitats. So their little graph, if you saw that, would just be really, really tiny. Really, really narrow. So it'd go here, come up, and go down like that. That would be a specialist. A generalist is going to be really broad, if you compare the two. Pretty pictures of bugs. Okay, the fossil record is how we know all these things have happened and how evolution has happened, because we've been able to look at fossils and see the changes of a particular animal species over time. And the fossil record also helps us with pollen, and pollen tells us in what areas of the earth at what time we had particular plant species. So it tells us when we had die-offs, when we had hot temperatures, when we had cold temperatures, based on, and wet conditions based on the animals and plants that lived there at that time. So we use the fossil record, helps us a lot. Fossils, we also do carbon dating on them to see how old this fossil is. And I think we've talked about how carbon dating works. If not, we will talk about it in more detail later on in the course. So there's been 5 global mass extinctions over time, and right now we're thinking we're in another one because we're losing so many species so fast. Let me give you some data on that. We're thinking we're in the 6th mass extinction right now. We're thinking that the extinction rate is going between 2 and 25% of a species on the earth are going to be extinct by 2020. That's an amazing amount. And we're thinking this is not due to, like, some of the extinctions were due to natural causes, like when the dinosaurs left, they think there was a meteorite that struck 65 million years ago and had a big giant dust cloud over the earth, and we lost a lot of species because of the not having sun reaching the earth. So the dinosaurs died out. But right now we're thinking that we're in the 6th mass extinction because we're losing so many species, and we think the cause is humans. We're ruining habitats, we're fragmenting habitats, we're changing the temperature on the face of the earth. So we're doing a lot. it says the recovery of biodiversity from earlier mass extinctions took over 10 million years. So that's a long time. That's like 500,000 human generations. So when we have an extinction and we're trying to recover, it can take a long, long time. So that's why we're a little afraid of the things that our humans are doing right now, messing with the conditions we have on Earth. So those are the cold, hard facts that are kind of scary to me. I don't know if they're scary to you, but they look pretty intense. So for chapter 5, I'd like you to do the multiple choice on page 141 to 142, numbers 1 through 10, and do the FRQs number 1 and 2. So do pages 141 and 142 for the homework for chapter 5. Thanks guys, I'll talk to you soon.